There we are. Okay, great. Well, look, I think we may as well make a start. We had about 80 people registering to join us, and I can see that we have about 20 with us already, and hopefully some more will make their way to us as we proceed. I can see more people arriving. So welcome, everybody. I just wanted to let you know that we've really got a fantastic audience making your way to us. We've got ESG practitioners from all around the world. We have people coming from think tanks across Europe. We have people joining us from government departments, from DEFRA in the UK. So we're checking a lot of boxes in terms of how ESG and an agreed ESG metric is important throughout the food system, throughout the food and agriculture. So so that's really wonderful. It's great to have everybody here. Just to sort of say, OmniAction is more than me, but I'm afraid you're stuck with just me from OmniAction today. There are usually more of us. And for our friends who are new to us in the room, just to sort of very quickly explain that OmniAction is a community of over 200 scientists and experts, and we share our firsthand experience and knowledge to create a framework which defines sustainability. We define it across 5 categories. So multi-criteria reporting really is us. And once that sustainability framework is in place, just letting more people in, once that sustainability framework is in place, we know that we'll be able to start asking the correct questions of the data. And once we have the correct questions of the data defined within our framework, and we start collecting that information, we're able to pull that data through, the correct data through across all facets of measuring food and agriculture impacts. And that, of course, includes our ESG investing requirements. So I hope all of that's quite clear, but we're here today to talk more about it if there are questions. All of our panelists are going to be discussing the risks that we currently face in the absence of an agreed metric. Still admitting people in here. For ESG. And one of the risks that we've uncovered that's, that sort of really tells the story, I think, is it was uncovered by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development when they were looking at the true value of food. And they found a 10.8 trillion deficit. So that was 10.8 trillion unaccounted for in externalities, which came from the fact that global food consumption earns 9 trillion a year, but it creates unaccounted costs of twice that figure at 19.8 trillion. Now, what we know in terms of what that means to the food system, of course, is that the outstanding externalities are born in by, in the poverty of workers and farmers who haven't been paid particularly well in terms of the health costs that we see, particularly around the impacts of poor food consumption, unhealthy food consumption, and of course in the environmental damage. But we will be hearing more from all of our panelists on the risks as they see them and experience them. We're going to spend 30 minutes speaking to our panelists. I'll introduce them one by one, and that gives us 30 minutes for a really frank, I think, and forthright discussion within the Q&A. Please, everybody, do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, add links. We're recording today as well, and we will be sharing the recording to the OmniAction community. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn to Matthias, Lomas. Each of you, if you could just unmute yourself as we go, please, when it comes to your turn. Matthias, could you just do a quick self-introduction and walk us through the great work that you've been doing, particularly via Share Action?
Yes, sure.
Yeah,
sure, Lise.
Over to you.
Thank you, Lise. And great to see everyone, so many relevant practitioners from lots of different fields on this important topic. So I'm Matthias Lomas. I work at Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation, and I'll explain what we do in just a sec. I'm going to spend a bit of time speaking about the ESG engagement work that I do with the food sector on nutrition, and also talk about why data is a powerful enabler of that, but how we need more and better data to kind of turbocharge our work. So a bit of background. As I say, I work at Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation. We're a health foundation focused on addressing health inequalities. We've been around since the 1500s, so a very long time, and we're based in South London, where a lot of our charitable work happens. Our mission is to invest in the foundations of a society that helps everyone stay healthier for longer. I work in the endowment of the foundation. We have about 1 billion in assets, and we have a dual mandate of financial return and direct health impact through our financial investments. And specifically, my job is to engage with our investments to generate health and wider social and environmental impact. And an important area that I focus on, I think is particularly relevant here, is engagement on healthy food with food companies. Now, we focus on this because we know consumers lack access to healthy and affordable food, and poor diet is one of the leading causes of ill health. It actually causes more deaths globally than smoking. So to do this engagement, we work closely with the shareholder engagement group, ShareAction, and specifically an initiative called Healthy Markets. In this coalition, we've banded together with other investors and been involved in some intensive engagements, such as co-filing a shareholder proposal with Tesco, which was actually the first shareholder proposal at a FTSE 100 company focused on health. And we've also co-filed with Unilever and undergone intensive engagement with them as well. And what I'd like to say here is that I think these engagements have really shown the power that investors can have when they come together around common asks, because they have been quite successful engagements. And it's also shown, as I alluded to at the beginning, the critical need for data and transparency in generating change through investor activism. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about data. So what's been really clear from the start in these engagements on healthy food is that having data on food companies is absolutely vital to any sort of progress. You need transparency as a first port of call, because when you have that transparent data, you can compare across companies, you can judge how well a company is doing, and that allows you to credibly ask them to step up their actions. So that's why in our engagement, our core asks of companies have been that they disclose the proportion of their sales that are healthy using an independently verified definition. And we've made significant progress. When the campaign started in 2019, only 2 retailers were reporting on the healthiness of their sales. Now 8 of the 11 largest UK retailers do report on the healthiness of their sales, and 5 of the 12 largest global manufacturers do. This hasn't been easy, but it's really been helped by unlocking change at powerful systemic actors like Tesco and Unilever. For both those companies, our group of investors had the simple ask of reporting on healthiness of sales using a government endorsed definition, and also setting targets to increase this proportion. And again, the transparency part was vital to ask for the second part. Initially, these companies were somewhat reluctant, but they did move after sustained engagement. And in fact, in both cases, we reached a settlement with the companies, which meant that the proposals didn't have to go to the annual general meeting of the companies. And what was really interesting is that we found after these engagements, other companies started to take notes and announce greater disclosure, greater transparency. So I think there is that multiplier effect again. I'd also like to just get across the message of the real need for a level playing field in the industry. Whilst we've made a lot of progress in these engagements, we have persistently faced 2 challenges which still exist today. The first is that there's very few accepted industry-wide metrics on nutrition, which makes it difficult to compare across companies. The second is that despite the fact that there's rising regulation, especially in the UK, aimed at combating obesity and generally improving diets, and there's also changing consumer preferences towards healthy food, companies often still don't feel compelled to act on nutrition due to the lack of that government set level playing field on specifically on transparency and target setting for healthier food sales. And really recognizing this, that's why earlier this year we banded together with a group of investors representing about 6 trillion in assets under management and led by Rathbone Greenbank Investments to call on the government to introduce mandatory reporting for food companies on both nutrition and sustainability metrics, which chimes with OmniAction's mission. This was following on from the National Food Strategy, led by Henry Dimbleby, the independent review presented to the government. There was a key recommendation in that for mandatory reporting for the food sector. And we're really glad that the government has heeded that call. They've stated their intention in the recent paper that they released on the food strategy to take forward mandatory reporting and hopefully have it in place by 2023. And we're also really glad that they've set up the Food Data Transparency Partnership, which, as we understand it, will give an opportunity for investors, for companies and other key industry stakeholders to input on data and to try and formulate key metrics for the sector. I think what's really critical now is that we have the right metrics which lead to the impact that I think we all really want to see across the food sector, and which also, it has to be said, are important, which are easy for companies to use, or at least not too burdensome for companies, because that way that will really help engender progress across the industry. So yeah, I think that's also why we're very interested in OmniAction's framework, and it's really welcomed. So that's all I wanted to say. I think just the last thing I would say actually is that based on the progress that we've made with the Healthy Markets network that I mentioned at ShareAction, we're also broadening that out to bring together investors to focus on health more broadly, engaging with companies. So focusing on areas like workplace health and also on air pollution. And that will be a new network called Long-Term Investors for People's Health. And again, data is going to be a critical part of that because there isn't enough data on health metrics. So I will end with that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. And I think it is a bit surprising to be reminded that the concept of health and nutrition isn't considered a standard category when considering what an ESG investment might be. So it's wonderful to know that there's really hard work been going on in your corner there. We're going to turn next to Catherine Chong. Catherine, are you with us?
Hi, hello. Hi,
Hi.
Lisa.
Hi, Catherine, do you mind doing a quick self-introduction, please? And I'm going to, well, I'm hoping that what you're going to do is explain a little bit about the difficulty of making investment decisions based, again, on poor, we're going to speak a lot about poor data, what that means to you in your working life and the risks that that presents to you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Lisa, for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for coming here. I'm aware that there's quite a number of us, so I'm going to make it as short, as sweet as possible. So I'm Catherine. I advise companies, governments, and investors on the economics of socio-ecological systems, including climate-related risks. My work includes developing PES schemes, that's payment for ecosystem services, industry and national sustainability accounting and reporting standards, particularly for finance, food, and fiber. Over the last 2 years, I diverted some of my time to work with grassroots organizations to speed up and scale up agroecological transitions. That is, how do we produce food while addressing the interlinkages between planetary, animal, human health, and how individuals and institutions could support that transition. So the rise of institutional interest for ESG information relating to food and beverage has generated a number of transparency initiatives in the UK, as some of those that Thomas have mentioned, and more large companies set net zero targets, which are great, but some of us are anxious about two particular issues, and I'll brought up that two issues. So the first one is ESG data in agri-food is incomplete and some are erroneous. So there are many types of data that's missing, but one of the most material one is method of production data. So that's the data that tells us how food is farmed and processed. That is requisite, I'll call it the mother of data, to determining the social ecological impacts of food and beverage. And at the moment, most initiatives relating to labeling and reporting, and definitely, I think some of my ESG practitioners are here. It would be interesting to see what you all think about the use of generic or synthetic life assessment data set that do not account for the variability in method of farming. So this increases uncertainty and lack of trust in the accuracy of the generated social ecological impact information that underpin the trillions of dollars averting finance all around the world. And then the second one is the carbon tunnel vision. So that's when institutions focus solely demand on greenhouse gas emission, and while ignoring other social ecological impact. So I feel like what we need to talk about here, if possible today, is what's at stake here? Is there a systemic failure in making and delivering sustainable finance? Is ESG the divine messenger, or actually the devil incarnate, according to Elon Musk? I'll stop here.
Brilliant, Catherine, fantastic. That's a great question to pose, and I think we're all itching to get to the Q&A moment so we can all discuss it. I'm actually going to ask Eline from FAIRR to join us. Eline, are you there?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, brilliant. Eline, I'll let you just dive into it because, yeah, we are running a little bit behind. You go.
Great. Thank you. So I'm Eline, I'm a policy officer at the FAIRR initiative, and FAIRR is an investor network representing assets under management of around $66 trillion. And we focus on ESG risks and opportunities in the global food system. So that includes climate, biodiversity, antibiotics, and working conditions, as well as a few others. And our flagship product is the Protein Producer Index that we produce every year, which covers 60 of the world's largest protein producing companies and assesses them on their performance on these ESG risks and also on opportunity areas like sustainable protein. And this is useful for investors because these risks are material to them and they have financial implications. We also run collaborative investor engagements, and we produce relevant reports and also some policy briefings. Some of the key points that I would like to address today are on information disclosure, as well as the role of policy and on the need to take a more sort of whole system approach and address multiple risks together, which Catherine also alluded to. So firstly, investors need sort of better data and disclosure of information against metrics which are relevant for the food system. And that is shown in our index as well. So our index research finds that only 18% of the companies that are covered right now have a Scope 3 emissions target. And as you know, Scope 3 emissions are very important in the food system, especially. Similarly, only, 82% of the companies don't yet disclose information on how they manage water scarcity risks in feed and on antibiotics, which is also a big risk. 62% of companies are categorized as high risk. And yeah, on the second point, on the importance of policy, I also wanted to highlight the importance of policy and regulation for investors in influencing information disclosure that is consistent across the board. it provides more certainty to investors, and there's some developments recently, for example, the ISSB proposals that are open for consultation right now. Recently in the US, the SEC consulted on guidance on climate change risk, and the EU is also seeking feedback on corporate sustainability reporting right now. So those are a few things that we're following that's important and relevant to this conversation. And then, yeah, like Catherine said, it's important that ESG factors beyond climate are considered in disclosure frameworks and regulation. So one of the things that investors in our network highlighted last year when the draft criteria for green investments under the EU taxonomy came out, they called for antibiotic risks and animal welfare to be included in those criteria. So not just focus on the climate criteria, because the EU taxonomy is supposed to define what activities constitute a green investment, and antibiotics are especially important and material because antibiotic resistance has been sort of labeled a silent pandemic by the G7. But yeah, those are my main points. I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, Eline, thank you so much. I know that we could spend an hour just talking about the dangers of antibiotic resistance. So yeah, we'll just have to come back to that another time. I'm going to ask Louis Marmon to join us now to leap in. Louis, I'm not quite sure if it's okay to call you a citizen activist or how you like to describe yourself. I'll just let you go.
You can call me an angry old man. That probably works pretty well. So thank you again, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss what we're doing. We've started a nonprofit here in the United States. We're located just outside of Washington, D.C., with our focus to try to make companies more environmentally and socially responsible. And the importance of this particular discussion today is very pertinent to what our approach is. We are looking for standards that will be established in each industry so that we can use them as a lever in order to prod, promote, and coerce corporations into becoming more environmentally and socially acceptable. By using standards that are throughout a particular industry, we can show that if you do not follow those standards, that there are negative financial implications, and that those negative financial implications will impact the corporation's bottom line. And since they have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, it is in their best financial interest in order to address these. We're looking right now with our colleague Terry, who's on the panel as well, for sustainability SDG 8.7, which addresses child slave labor in the food chain. Particularly, we're focusing our first initiatives on the cocoa trade. And while because standards of sustainability tend to be rather nebulous right now, there is one, 8.7, which is rather direct: no child slave labor. Our point is that if a company is going to be rated by external forces like Sustainalytics and Bloomberg and other ones, if they have child slave labor, their ESG rating is going to be low. A low ESG rating has negative financial impacts. It increases the cost of doing business, reduces revenues, reduces investments. So we're going to use those metrics that are established. Right now we have 8.7, and we're hoping that there'll be some in these industries. We're going to use those metrics in order to demonstrate to corporations that it is in their financial interest to do what needs to be done, which is to become more environmentally and socially acceptable. Our approach is we are a membership nonprofit. It costs nothing to become members. So we will submit shareholder resolutions to these corporations, pointing out that we represent a very large number of potential customers, which also would have a negative impact. We're not really relying on government to do this. We are rather suspicious of government. since at least in the United States, it tends to be in the pocket of corporate donors. So that is our approach. That is why we're very excited to be part of this conference and looking forward to the establishment of these types of metrics to help us move forward in our goals to make corporations more responsible citizens.
Louis, thank you so much. And I hope you don't mind me adding that what I find particularly interesting is the fact that you're a surgeon, I think, a children's surgeon.
Yes.
And you've just decided to take this on as a member of the public who cares about what's going on around you.
It's a little bit more than that, if I may. I mean, because I'm a pediatric surgeon. I operate on babies and children. And it got to the point, like, what's the point of fixing a baby that is supposed to live for 100 years, saving their life, and there's no life for them to live? So this is why I do what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's a great example of taking a full system perspective on what we're all doing in this world. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Louis. I'm going to turn next to Sarah. Sarah, again, I will not do an introduction. I'll leave that to you, please. We'll march on.
Okay, thanks, Lise, and hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Blanchard, and today I'm representing Prof Consulting Group, which is a food and grocery FMCG consultancy. So with an ESG lens, we want to help our customers make better choices, whether it's a buyer choosing the right ingredient or a supplier or a shopper in a supermarket. And our clients include food companies, investors, and trade organizations. We also work in partnerships, for example, with Supply Pilot, a supplier collaboration company, and My Emissions, a carbon labeling startup. And some of the conversations we've been having recently, a client will say, our investor asks if we're doing ESG. What does it mean, doing ESG? Or we're not doing anything, or we don't know where to start. And quite often they are doing things, but they don't know how to measure them or talk about it in the right language. So my background is in food, so specifically food technology and sustainability. And I've been lucky enough to always have worked in food and have held roles in technical quality, food safety, innovation, and sustainability in food service and wholesale retail. And I've been really lucky to have lived and worked in different countries in Africa, Asia, and in Europe, and see the different food systems playing out there. But my belief is that everyone should have access to sustainable food, and that sustainability is everyone's business. And I've experienced in my work that you don't have to have sort of sustainability in your title to make changes in your social and environmental impact. And that's one of the driving forces behind what I do. If we come to the question, which I believe I need to answer here, is the challenges that our clients are facing in an environment with no agreed metric. Well, we need to step back a bit from the metric, because there's no agreed accepted definition of sustainability in food. And, we all know in recent years it's become fashionable, which lets companies figure out their own meaning for it, which can lead to greenwashing, as we've seen a few examples in the press recently in the UK. We're also seeing there's this tunnel vision that sustainability is about environmental sustainability, specifically cutting emissions to net zero. We've just heard about that a few times. And obviously, this is really important to tackle climate change, but it means that companies don't fully open their eyes to the risks and opportunities of environmental and social sustainability, and the value that can bring. So, some are talking just about recycling or donating surplus food or giving money to local charities. It's a very cherry picking. So a holistic and universal approach is needed with metrics, we find. Right now, there are so many ESG schemes of different quality, which also allows companies to select the one that best fits their expectations and just to show that they're doing something. But those who are interested in those don't necessarily know how to challenge them. And this brings us to transparency, because companies need to be able to show what they're doing in sustainability and to be encouraged and supported to get better. An agreed metric would allow comparison between companies and allow better decisions to be made. For example, if I'm a buyer and I want to know which supplier is genuinely not causing forests to be cut down for the animal feed that goes into my meat supplies, for example. So for global brands and companies importing products, these metrics need to be globally applicable so that it facilitates fair trade within and between borders. If we cut really down into the food company focus, so typically a retailer or wholesaler will have thousands or even tens of thousands of products, like on a country level, and it's hard to decide which to focus your efforts on. So whether that's by category or type, like dairy or vegetables, and which issue by materiality, like is it deforestation or water use? And this is really frustrating when you're inside one of these companies and you have to manage across many different types of products and understand the many issues that can happen at any point of the supply network. So I'll give you a taster of the realities when you're working in the space. And this is the kind of thing that just happens on a regular basis. I've seen this, experienced this in my career. So I tell my buyer we need to improve our packaging, and the buyer says, well, what exactly do you mean? And anyway, you told me last month I have to ask for the supplier's food safety certificate. And tomorrow I have a meeting with the social standards person who wants me to ask my supplier to get an order, or which one, by the way, and that's going to add cost. So which thing do you want me to work on? And by the way, who's paying for this? Oh, and you know, the annual negotiation with the supplier is finished now, so I can't change anything for the next year. So you can imagine how this feels when you're faced with that brick wall. And that's just one buyer in one category talking about a few issues. And you can see how the situation typically leads to paralysis and inertia if it's not properly managed. So if there was a clear accepted definition of sustainable food and with mandated metrics that make sense and that preferably can be drawn from credible company information, it would make these conversations go easier. And when the metrics are incorporated into internal systems, tracking and incentives, they just become part of the way to do business. And metrics really need to be seen as a means to improve continuously. They're not the end of the story. And there are many, many people who want to make change, including those buyers who want to do the right thing, but they need to be shown what to do, and they need to be encouraged to do it and recognized when they get it right. So that ends my perspective on the subject. Over to you, Lise.
Sarah, thank you so much for that. Right, I'm going to invite Terry to speak next, please. Terry, I was struck by something I read about a court case that you were recently involved in, which involved chocolate companies suggesting that consumers and retailers need to be protected from higher chocolate prices, the cost of which, of course, would be borne by trafficked child laborers. So, I mean, it just goes to show that if this sort of thing isn't being picked up in an ESG metric, if companies engaged in this kind of behavior are still accessing readily ESG finance, we've got some work to do, surely. Terry, are you there? I think you need to unmute yourself. I wonder if we've lost him.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Hi, thanks, Lise, for inviting me and for that perfect question. I am just quickly the director of National Rights Advocates, and what we do is time looking for exposing and trying to remedy human rights violations by multinational companies. So based on 30 years of experience chasing multinationals, where they have this corporate playbook, they issue a code of conduct that promises everything in the world, and then they typically do nothing except point to their policy and say, well, we're against child labor, we're against deforestation. See, it says so right here. That's the level of trust I have for these corporations based on 30 years of experience. They will lie, they will PR you, they will lobby the Congress, and they will prevent enforcement of law. So where I sit, ESG is the devil in disguise, and it also just adds a layer of sophistication to greenwashing. It looks like it's fair. There's a number there. Look at that. So it's a horrible system unless we can actually make it objective and outside monitor it and make sure that there's the funds to do it. Now, Lou mentioned that we are indeed launching a model project to try to expose the cocoa industry for their lies in the ESG sector. But guess what? We need money to do that. So we've got foundation proposals out there. So the only check on this ESG system is groups like ours that typically don't have the money to just at the drop of a hat go investigate a major industry and try to expose it. So that is the fault in the system. It's easily fixable, but right now I think everyone's getting all excited because this looks objective, but it's not. Let me just close by giving one clear example, Nestle. I have been chasing and suing and exposing Nestle's child slavery in Cote d'Ivoire for well over 20 years. Nestle, I just looked at their ESG report before this. Nestle, no one called me to ask about Nestle's social score. No one even mentioned that they were looking at Nestle's social score to anyone I know. Well, guess what? They got a really good score. And they were able to, and this is the other problem with ESG, these companies are shopping for a favorable company to do their report, and they're able to emphasize their strengths without any pushback or exposure of their weaknesses. So they got a high score on social by emphasizing that they hire a lot of women in senior positions. They create jobs for young people. And they have high number of servings of affordable nutrition, which is in their products, junk food. So their social score is high. No one reading it would guess that they're engaged in systematic child slavery and deforestation in Cote d'Ivoire. So we need a lot of work to get this system actually useful. Thanks.
Terry, thank you. If that doesn't get people talking, I don't know what will. I'm really happy to open the floor to discussion now. If you have something you'd like to ask or add, please literally just unmute yourself and go for it. I don't imagine we'll be speaking over one another. I'm sure it will be fine. I mean, I think I have a generic question to everybody, which is it fair for us to use the term ESG and the terms ESG and sustainability interchangeably? Is that an assumption that has become mainstream and actually should never have become so? I'm not quite sure who'd like to jump in there. Maybe Catherine.
Okay. Well, first of all, Terry, I will very likely to quote you from now on. I really like that. ESG is a sophisticated greenwashing. I definitely have been in meetings lately whereby the client would say to me that your list of limitations are so long that you're making me think that you are sabotaging ESG rather than selling your service. And so the issue isn't so much of the term ESG and how widely it is used, but rather the lack of understanding of data, broadly speaking, as well as our socio-ecological system and socio-ecological system processes. And in terms of ESG metrics, and I think, Lisa, we talked about this briefly the other day, that, I think we need as a sector, or the ESG sector, need to have the maturity to admit that ESG, when it comes to metric and standards, is essentially, it's a negotiation. It's a political negotiation. So what comes after we admit that? Then I think it's the humility of making clear that ESG metrics or standard has built-in limitations. And what we need to do is to make sure that the data fits into the metrics or primary data. And that requires a lot of resources, but it's actually the simplest part of the equation. If you look at 2 decades of UN climate change conference, the challenge has hardly been about scientific consensus. It's always have been the political consensus.
So there really is a role for regulation here. We might get to that a little bit further. Sarah, I just wanted to bring you in as well, because I think Sarah and I have spoken in the past about something Catherine just touched on, which is that this can be done. It's just about being organized and practical. And one element of regulation which doesn't get discussed a lot is the food safety regulation, which does create opportunities for collecting broader sets of data at method of production stage, and that could be a good route into widening access to sustainability data, perhaps.
Yeah, Lisa, absolutely. think in most of these large companies, they do have well-established food safety systems. Now, whether they always work very well is open for discussion, of course, and that there will always be scandals there. But there is this systematic approach to improving food safety, to asking suppliers to install food safety management systems, to have certification, to have regular follow-ups. Certification isn't the end of it. There is those needs for partnership as well, and that does get missed, that's not done enough. But the ability to go through the supply networks, identify the different tiers of suppliers is something that can be, I think, applied across into social and environmental sustainability, because if you look at it from a buying perspective or a retail or a brand perspective, you're dealing with the one supplier or the one network of suppliers, and you can put your requirements through to them, your expectations for data, certification, whatever it is. And again, highlighting that certification is not the end of the story. You really need to work closer in partnership. So yeah, I think sustainable food safety is really a route into that, really also because of this systematic approach and this risk-based approach. A lot of the methodology is already there. And that's not to say food safety people are social experts or environmental experts, no, but there are a lot of cross skills there and cross systems.
Great, thank you. And I know Louis has absolutely no time for regulation. I completely respect his position there. But I wonder if anybody would like to come in and talk about I would suggest the real need for alignment across regulatory approaches. We see the World Benchmarking Alliance, for example, doing some great work on benchmarking the top 350 food and agriculture companies. And this type of approach tends to depend on publicly disclosed company information, which I'm sure everyone on this call is used to having to work from. I know Eline will as well. It's always struck me as slightly unfair in a regulatory environment where there is no kind of set framework in which this kind of corporate disclosure is required. It doesn't ever really seem fair that companies are being judged on information that they're volunteering. So that's just kind of one of the aspects to what I would consider the need for alignment, particularly as regulation begins to come online. But I wonder if anyone else would like to leap in there with any thoughts.
Lise, I can come in on that point actually, based on our experience. I think that someone said that there's no agreed definitions of sustainability, and I think that's exactly it. And definitely in the space of nutrition, we've seen that every company almost has a different definition of what healthy is, what healthy foods are. And of course, they will tailor it according to their portfolio and what makes their portfolio look good, as is natural for them to do so. So I actually disagree about government. I appreciate that the US context might be different to the UK, and it's not like we don't have lobbying here as well. But I do think that the government is needed to kind of break that logjam, because you need that level playing field and you need a common definition of what some of these concepts mean. And I feel that other stakeholders can only go so far in determining that, and there is no other actor that has that powerful mechanism to set the definition. And ultimately that is, I mean, not wishing to stray into the realm of politics too much, but that is also the proper democratic means, I feel, that then has that legitimacy.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I can see in the chat, Laura's asking about how to make the metric equitable and fair. And I think perhaps, again, when we talk about the role of regulation and policy, that can be one mechanism for achieving that. Is it Jen or Yen? I can see your hand up, and please do leap in, and then we'll ask Terry to jump in after you.
Thank you. It's Jen. My name is Jen Yates. I'm the director of the True Cost Accounting Accelerator, and really pleased to be part of this conversation today. I am, I was intrigued to join the call because the accelerator working in our community of practice of folks working to advance true cost accounting frequently considers how to align and make true cost accounting sort of the robust tool for the private and public sector to use in measuring impacts, understanding dependencies, and to move away from ESG type approaches that do amount to greenwashing without any accountability and transparency, and allow companies to obscure their negative impacts by only cherry picking, as Terry said, their positive impacts. So I guess I'm curious, we just did an assessment that is about to be published, looking at about 34 different approaches across different initiatives that are somewhat in that, looking across natural impacts, human health impacts, social impacts, economic impacts that you might call true cost accounting. And we weren't aware, I think, of this initiative. So I think it's there are so many of these types of initiatives out there. So and WBCSD is on our steering committee, and we've worked with, I know I've spoken with Howgood and others in this work. So I'm just curious how we kind of come together and bring these in, map these different initiatives so that we're really coming up with an aligned approach that can be sort of global and really robust in nature. And I don't have an answer, I'm just more posing the question, but I do think that true cost accounting presents that sort of ESG 2.0 that might have that accountability and move away from the greenwashing.
That's great, Jen. Thank you so much. Yes, I mean, I do hope that we will make this a regular feature, actually. So what OmniAction is seeking to do is synthesize the thinking of experts such as yourself into the framework that we're proposing. And we define that, we call it a North Star framework, which means wherever you are in your sustainability journey and wherever you are in the world, you can pick and choose the bits of the indicators, the bits of the category that you're prepared to have a go at first. Because this is the product of people actually working at the coalface across the food system, it's quite de-risked. Whether you're a policymaker or somebody in business, that this is the thinking that's come from a lot of people across the food system and from all aspects of the food system. So we'll carry on with this conversation and hopefully that framework can be put to use in situations such as the one that you've just described. Terry, let's let you come in next.
Thank you. While I, of course, agree with Lou here in the United States that our system is politically corrupt, as it is in most places, we do need some form of regulation to, I think, specify what are the standards that must be met for you to claim success in each of the ESG categories. For example, child labor, there's a metric for it, but if Nestle can get away with ignoring it, then that shows a serious problem there. I also just want to flag for your interest that we have successfully, we survived a motion to dismiss, which means we will get to go to trial and get discovery against Nestle for consumer fraud in merely claiming to the public in their advertising and on their website that they don't use child labor. So we've exposed this, and we hope to now go to trial to prove that they're lying about that. And we are considering seriously doing a similar consumer fraud case involving their ESG report, that they claim apparently that they're doing everything wonderful, and that's misleading to consumers who don't know or don't have the time to dig to find out that they're profiting from child slavery. So those are two aspects of enforcement that we're going to remain engaged on.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that. It's interesting to hear that not every American is completely down on the possibilities of regulation.
Lisa,
we're at home with regulation over on this side of the pond.
Lisa, I felt like it would be great if we could, given I'm aware of the time, that if we could actually discuss the questions that Laura asked, And I think that's a really important question, which is how do we make sure that the implementation of a metric is equitable and fair? I don't have all the answers, but I think I will go back to what we talked about earlier, if I may start this, and I'm definitely keen to hear from everyone as well, that it's not just, so we talk about transparency in terms of data earlier. I think we need also to talk about transparency in terms of the political process. And if we do, as I said earlier, have the maturity to accept that metric standard settings is a political process. And so with that, it's about having representation, appreciating the institutional interest, power, that's who are the people that's actually setting the standards. I think that would be perhaps a starting point rather than a full answer.
Great, I'll give this a try. My perspective is that the language of these corporations that we want to change is spoken in terms of finance. And unless you're able to frame it in that context, I don't believe we're going to get them to change. So I would suggest that is, as Catherine was alluding to, that there are stakeholders, and it's the stakeholders who are going to be responsible for eliciting these changes. And at least in the way things are currently structured, those stakeholders are going to be shareholders. And if you can convince the shareholders that there is a financial impact to not following these metrics, then they will compel changes in the corporations. And we saw that the power of shareholders just with engine number one and Exxon. And we're seeing it in any number of other areas where there has been effective shareholder advocacy. And I believe that stakeholders will be the key to implementing all of these the proposals and the metrics that we have both in the food and agriculture and in other industries.
Great, thanks so much, Louis. We have a request, which I think is a very reasonable one, to Terry for, Terry, I don't know if you've got a link to the legal paperwork that you've lodged, but just kind of further evidence speaking to some of the things that you've said today. If you don't have it handy to go in the chat, we can send it round to everybody afterwards when I send a link to the recording and that sort of thing as well. We have just 5 minutes left, and I'm aware that I've done a lot of talking. So if I stay quiet for a couple of minutes, it will give others a chance to speak up. And please do just take yourself off mute and join in the conversation.
Could I pick up on something that Louis just said? So my name is Fidelity Weston, and I'm chair of a campaign in the UK called Colyer. And apologies if Catherine's already mentioned us, because I joined this call late. Did she mention us or not? Catherine, you're on mute.
Hi, I was about to cue you to speak.
Oh, okay.
Actually, Fidelity, fantastic.
Okay, so just really quickly then, I think she obviously didn't, but we are basically, we would say we're stakeholders in this whole business about data ending up on labels. So we are a consortium of 40 non-governmental organisations representing food, farming and civil society. And what we're saying is that in the UK, we believe that it's totally possible for us as farmers and producers to be providing information on method of production that shows how we're producing our food. They would reflect on our animal welfare, on our environmental and on our social. It could reflect on a whole range of aspects. And I totally supported what Sarah said about agreeing a principle about collecting data that goes into these metrics. And over the years, it can change. It must be really flexible. So in the UK, we're looking at a new agriculture policy. If we as farmers sign up to doing good things on our farms, that should link in with this new data new metrics that's collecting data from us as farmers. And we want this to happen because we believe it's the only way that in the UK we are going to be able to distinguish what we think we're doing, what the good farmers are doing from the bad farmers. So it's really supporting farmers to make change in the way they produce their food, so we get better produced food in every single sense of the word. And also it will protect us from having much lower standard produced food coming into the country as well. So as far as delivery is concerned, we're not saying that the government should deliver this, because I completely agree with those of you who say it probably never ever happen. There's a mass amount of information and expertise in the industry, in the manufacturing industry, and the whole of the food industry, if you look at all of the stakeholders. But what we do need the government to do, and the UN, I would say, listening to this conversation and thinking about it on a international front, is that something formal needs to be set up to make this happen, and it has to be mandatory. Everybody has to do it, and it has to be data driven from the bottom up, so the grassroots are involved right the way through.
Thanks, Fidelity. I think, is it fair to ask whether you believe farmers such as yourself or producers such as those within your consortium actually access the finance that you think you have the right to? Given that you would describe what you're doing as incredibly sustainable, are you actually able to access the, potentially the ESG finance that you think you're worth?
So I'd say at the moment, it's incredibly hard to distinguish one method of production from another. And I'll just give a really quick example to the audience who are here today. We produce on our farm 100% grass-fed beef. In the UK, you can use the term grass-fed if it's just predominantly grass-fed, which means it's 51%. Frankly, the other 49% of the animal's life could have been in a feedlot. We have no way at the moment of distinguish ourselves in the market unless we join a certification scheme. So I would say that is an example how we as farmers, we can't compete in the market because there's no means for doing it. It's completely opaque, and basically there's not an interest at the moment probably in people sourcing food to actually have that distinction going on between good and poor farmers, because it's far easier to just have one big block of farmers all producing beef and forget about the rest, when of course, as we know, that has such a huge impact on the environment. So I hope I've answered your question, Lisa. In a nutshell, we can't distinguish ourselves at the moment. Going back to the question that Laura put in, I think it's really useful about us as small farmers being able to sub the cost of doing this. I don't really see why it should cost us a lot of money to provide this information, because we are increasingly being asked for information from the government, and I'm absolutely sure we'll be asked for more information from the government. The Sustainable Food Trust in the UK has just piloted a scheme whereby they would collect data from farmers, which could be fed into a food labelling metrics. I tried it out myself. It was quite complicated. It was quite hard. Lots of farmers would think, oh my God, I don't think I can do this. But actually, once you've done it once, you probably could find you could do it. So I think, again, if there's a will to make this happen, it's all there for the taking, but we have to have the political will to make sure it really happens in a proper way.
If I may add, actually, I would say farmers like Fidelity, agroecological farmers in the UK, like Fidelity, is actually not saying that we're extremely sustainable. What they're saying is that let's collect the data, then determine what is the environment, social and governance impacts relating to the food production. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And it's always really important to make sure that we are focusing very much on creating the infrastructure that enables that sort of data collection, rather than pouring all sorts of assumptions into conversations such as this. So it's really, really important to be reminded of that. So we've passed the hour, everybody. I'm happy to hang about. I don't have to be anywhere just yet, although I'm quite looking forward to a gin and tonic with lots of ice in it. It's nice, and we keep talking about it in England. We're very, very boring about the fact that it's hot here. You can see we're all kind of very unusually wearing summer clothes. So if anybody has anything they'd like to add, please jump in now. Otherwise, as I said, really looking forward to continuing this conversation, really looking forward to accessing any reference methodology that OmniAction should actually be incorporating into our framework, into our table of categories and indicators as we build them, which, as I say, we're building for the purposes of answering the question, what is sustainability, in order to get to the right data. So anyone and everyone, very, very, you're very welcome to be sending any further information that we should be incorporating into that activity. But again, I'll stop talking for just long enough to allow others to speak if they'd like to.
Lise, I'd like to say a final thing on data and quality of data. What we do see is a paralysis because people are concerned about not having the exact granular product site farm data. And there are ways to get an indication on the environmental impact, at least, of your product by using generic data. It's not ideal, we know it, but people are changing decisions using that. So I think we have to say, well, let's use what you've got. Make a start, at least start looking and find transparency in your supply chain and improve your data as you go along. So absolutely granular individual is the way we need to go, but we've got to start with what we've got.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. You have very much repeated the catch cry of the data scientists, the LCA practitioners, and the ESG practitioners within our community who, for whom, they're just very adamant. We go with what we have. We don't allow the obstacles that we see to slow things down. The world is on fire. We're all in a hurry here. And it's possible in the new agile work environment to be very honest about where we are, to continue to iterate and to make sure that we're being transparent about the fact that we are incorporating, good science, good expertise, good thinking as it lands. But that should be no reason to do nothing. And I think probably everybody on the call agrees with the role of synthesized data, with the health warning that it comes with, though. Anything else?
I am sorry, actually, I would say I really struggle with that. I really struggle to agree with that fully. I mean, we've looked at the last, 10, 20 years of trillions of dollars supposedly financing sustainable development in Asia and also Africa. And so fundamentally, we are using data that's incomplete and actually erroneous. We're directing money to not where it's most needed. And so we do accept that there is food crisis, there's climate emergencies going on here. I'm sorry, where I am now, I would say we can't continue to use poor data when that's life at stake.
Great. So there is a real urgency around making sure we speed up the efforts to create the infrastructure for appropriate data collection. It's great. It's great to hear that from you, Catherine. Anyone else? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
Hi, my name is Gene Ruda. I'm the chairman of Eightfold Group and Trace TR8CE. I have written a recent article. It's on Medium. It's called French Fried Ecocide. And it's an examination of a potential system that can capture not only data and ensure transparency, but a system that rewards the good, rewards specific measurable SDG indicators, and at the same time recovers and collects the costs that are not being recognized. I call it the carbon curtain. Much like the Iron Curtain, there's a carbon curtain, and it is in the front of this, and it's on stage, and then on front of the stage is a gaslit spokesperson with minutia data about the good that they're doing, the little or the less bad. Let me just say that, the less bad. We need a circular economic paradigm shift. It's a financial matter, and it is a data issue. And the only way this data is going to be transparent is if we, what I call
Thank you, Jean. That's lovely to hear from you. Thank you. I wonder if that's a good note to end on, actually, because we should feel incredibly inspired and motivated after that. We're just coming up to 10 minutes past, and I'm just loath to shut down if there's anyone in the room who hasn't had their chance yet. So please do just speak up if that's the case. No? Okay. We have 16 participants left, so I think most people have had to jump off and get on to the next thing. Thank you so much to everybody for your time. We will be back in touch with the recording and with some further documentation around what we've discussed. In the meantime, do reach out with anything more you'd like included when that newsletter goes out. And once again, I thank you all very, very much for your time. It's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much all. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Lisa.